that's the background story. That's how Formosus walked to his grave. Now it's time to investigate why they made him leave his tomb, why such a ghastly trial tainted the sacred halls of St. John Lateran. Let's slow down and analyze the situation. What's the most absurd element in the trial? The corpse, of course. But is the presence of the corpse that absurd? On one hand, there have been several posthumous trials in the Middle Ages. One of them even involved the Pope, Honorius I, who was struck by an anathema several years after his death. Honorius was luckier than Formosus though, because his accusers didn't summon his corpse. They just condemned him and left him be. On the other hand, exhuming a corpse to put it on trial wasn't as rare as we think. Even if this seems absurd according to modern standards, the medieval legal practice allowed to put corpses, even skeletons, on trial. Actually, it was considered rather normal to exhume political enemies during popular uprising, to hold them responsible for their past wrongdoings. According to Roger Collins, there was also a religious reason that could have legitimized the exhumation of Formosus' corpse.
I think a lot of the symbolism in the synod and what happens after, I think this actually reflects a lot of the influence of the ideas of Pope Gregory the Great, that those who might, if you like, go undetected in life could still, not only would they expect celestial punishment, but that some kind of symbolic treatment of their earthly remains was actually quite permissible. He himself, according to one of the stories in his dialogues, when he found that one of his monks had, despite the clear instructions in the monastic rule that Gregory himself had created for those monks, had secretly kept a gold coin, a small token, if you like, of his previous secular life, which was not found until this monk had died. It was found amongst, as it were, his few poor possessions. And Gregory immediately ordered his body to be thrown out and cast upon a dunghill. Rather than be buried in the monastic cemetery, it was just cast out and allowed to rot. And he describes this very clearly, and this was a very explicit physical expression of his ideas as were proper conduct and the way in which failure to meet those standards should be treated.
Given this broader context, we should look at the trial from an historical standpoint. We know that it wasn't like day-to-day business for the papal court to put a dead pope on trial. We have proof of that because a few years later another papal synod reprimanded both organizers and participants in the trial, to the point of burning all the proceedings. Nevertheless, we ought to recognize that the Cadaver Trial was at least something thinkable within the cultural coordinates of that time. This said, we still ignore why the trial actually happened. What pushed Pope Stephen to dig one of his predecessors out of the grave? Why did he make Formosus' corpse face trial? Madness. Madness is the first thing that comes to mind when one tries to explain how such a trial happened. And madness is actually the rationale historians from the Middle Ages used to explain Stephen's behavior. He must have been mad, he hated Formosus beyond reason. Many people believe that if something seems too abnormal, it has to be placed outside the domain of reason. But that's a very simple explanation. Even too simple. For instance, one may ask, granted that Stephen was mad, why did he hate Formosus so much? This leads us to investigate Pope Stephen's background, to uncover his allegiances. It's very likely that he looked at the Spoleto family with benevolence. After Arnulf's quick retreat, Ageltrud and Lambert of Spoleto represented the most powerful players in central Italy. So it's possible that Stephen felt the urgency to forge an alliance with them. Perhaps he feared some sort of retaliation. Perhaps he was voluntarily in league with them. It's difficult to tell. We know, though, that he later recognized Lambert as the only emperor, thus dismissing Arnulf's claim to the crown. Anyway, if Stephen was indeed allied with Ageltrud and Lambert, the Cadaver Trial is by large the meanest revenge one can get over a dead enemy. And from the Spoleto family standpoint, Formosus was the villain. First, he crowned Guy and Lambert while secretly siding with Arnulf. Then, he summoned the German king not once, but twice. Finally, he unleashed a wrecking ball army upon the family, nearly wiping them out of their hometown. They probably had hard feelings towards Formosus. That's obvious. Truth to be told, politics is rarely a matter of feelings. Especially during turbulent times, politicians need to carefully measure how to blow the strike, trying to maximize the effects, while minimizing the negative reactions. And if you think it through, the Cadaver Trial had a few consequences that actually harmed the family. When Formosus was condemned, all his acts became null. This means that every coronation he celebrated was now voided, and therefore even Lambert's investiture was considered to be invalid. And that's something the Spoleto family did not want, because just like nowadays, politics in the Middle Ages were focused on the legitimation of power. Just think about those formidable kings who came down to Rome to have an old guy put some fancy metal disc over their temples. Did they need that from a practical point of view? They, who had armies, who ruled over many lands and amassed richness beyond measure. These coronations did not gift them with more soldiers, territories. That old man, clothed in white, gave them something better, the best instrument a ruler can get. He gave them authority, an undying, unyielding consecration that came directly from God in heaven. When the Pope performed the coronation, these lords gained the respect of their servants, the impalpable right to rule over their lands. Roger Collins describes what was it like to have Carolingian blood while running for the imperial scepter.
As successive members of the family died, the few remaining were claiming it, and to acquire legitimacy, to be recognized as emperor, they also needed essentially papal consecration. And so they required papal acceptance, and therefore the papacy itself was becoming both a powerful force in its own papal state, but also it had enormous influence outside in terms of who might be recognized amongst the various rival candidates.
Power speaks its own language. It flows through symbols and condenses itself in forms and images. When you touch those symbols, you reach the immaterial power beyond them. That's how concrete actions influence the intangible reign of politics. That's the path Stephen traveled when he decided to put Formosus on trial. To decode Stephen's intention, we'll look at the language the trial spoke, the symbols it played with. We know Formosus was dressed in his old regalia. How the violent exhumation of a body complies with the gentle action of dressing that same corpse in elegant attire? Why this care? Why Stephen treated Formosus' corpse with all the dignity a pontiff deserves? And why such caring manners did not extend beyond the time of the trial, neither before nor after? It was brutality in disguise. For this trial to work, Formosus had to be recognizable as a pope. He must wear all those garments that made him a pope when he walked the earth. Stephen aimed to destroy Formosus not just as a man, but as a symbol.